I don't know if you're familiar with the controversy in Los Angeles where several members of the city council, and in fact a labor union leader, they were talking on a series of calls. I guess they were Zoom calls or some sort of conference calls. And there were all kinds of racial epithets used, racial epithets against blacks. In one case, a reference to Jews. And they were talking about a state assembly member named Richard Katz, talking about how the Jews have made a deal with South Los Angeles. At one point, the council president, Nuri Martinez, who is obviously Hispanic, she's now resigned, but she referred to a colleague's, who was black, his son, as she compared him to a monkey. And then talking about another guy, she goes, F that guy, he's with the blacks. Now, all of this erupted several days ago, and I was kind of watching it with interest to see what kind of sense people would try to make of it. Well, here's Charles Blow, the African-American columnist for the New York Times, a revealing racist rant in LA. Now, here's Charles Blow's take on this episode, and he goes into it in some detail. He says that this is what he calls not white supremacy, but light supremacy, L-I-T-E. And his point is that you have lighter-skinned people who are not white, in this case, obviously Hispanic, but he goes, they are kind of borrowing the racism of the whites and allying with white supremacy against their darker skinned black colleagues. So according to Charles Blow, he's like, at one time in the civil rights movement, we had kind of hoped that there would be an alliance of all the minorities to overthrow white supremacy. He goes, it's not really working out that way. And what this latest episode shows is that the people in the middle, let's call them the coffee colored people or the brown people, really he's referring to people like Debbie and me. He goes, these are the people who are going to join the white supremacists, and look over here, look at this episode. Now, I think that what is funny about all this is that this is a complete misreading of what is going on in this episode itself. So let's look a little more clearly and a little more honestly at what is actually happening. There is a struggle for power when groups identify ethnically, and to some degree, that is unavoidable. I mean, we want to get rid of race as a factor in decision making, but you can't get rid of ethnicity. You can't prevent, for example, Indian Americans in kind of coalescing together, lending money to one another. Jews, of course, have been tribal for thousands of years. Most people have a tribal element to them. And I think what's going on here is that you have a jostling for power that is going on in Los Angeles between different ethnic groups. And the jostling now is not occurring with the whites so much as it is between the blacks and the Hispanics. Now, let's notice that blacks have disproportionately high levels of political power in Los Angeles compared to Hispanics. Los Angeles is almost one half Latino. So you'd be like, well, you'd probably expect roughly one half of Latinos, not necessarily to be university professors or to be in any particular profession, but to be represented in politics, because after all, democratic politics is supposed to roughly reflect people as they are in a given community. But turns out that the Hispanics in Los Angeles are, as the left now says, underrepresented. And so what are they doing? They're pushing to get more political power. And so they are now in ethnic rivalry with the blacks. It's not that the Hispanics are like, we are half white and so we are joining white supremacy. No, it's more like, and at one point, here's Charles Blow, he goes, the problem with this kind of, as he calls it, light supremacy is, he goes, it's based on the idea that political power is a zero-sum game. Well, here's my point. It is. Political power is a zero-sum game because if one group gets more, it means the other group gets less. And this is true, by the way, of other areas as well. University admissions is a zero-sum game. Why? Because the number of seats, for example, at Yale Law School or at University of Michigan freshman class is limited. If it was an unlimited number of seats, they could always say, well, let's take more, and it's not going to affect any other group. But if you get more blacks and or Hispanics at Yale, that means less whites and less Asian Americans. That's an algebraic necessity. diversity. You cannot raise the level of underrepresented groups without lowering the level of the overrepresented groups. And so here what's going on is it seems to me that this kind of ethnic hostility isn't so much racism in the classic sense. I mean, I think it's very revealing that Charles Blow in this article never defines racism. He never says what racism is. Racism is a belief in the biological superiority of one group over another. Now, where in this exchange, acrimonious though it is, insulting though it is, people are calling each other's names, but where is racism? Where is it that Nuri Martinez, who's supposedly the worst offender, where does she say or even imply that Hispanics are biologically superior to blacks? She never does that. She basically doesn't like blacks. And what happens is, by the way, the feeling is often reciprocal. Ethnic groups jostling for power often develop a certain kind of animus or hostility to one another. So that, I think, is a more accurate reading of what's going on than Charles Blow's bloviations.